All right, welcome to part 8 of our Firebase chat app series. In this part, we're going to be setting up a good deal of our user interface as well as bringing in some dependencies and talking about what they are, what they're going to be used for. We'll see how we do on time, and we might set up the model objects for our chat as well. So things like sender, the message, and all that good stuff. So let's begin by opening up our project. And before we actually build and run anything, let's open up Terminal and cd into the project directory. And we're going to open up the pod file as we're going to bring in the other dependencies through CocoaPods as well. So let's come down here and let's bring them in. So the first one we want to bring in is called Message Kit. And this basically allows us to create really nice chat user interfaces. We could do it manually, and I will probably explain along the way how to do it manually. But essentially, we'd be building Message Kit, so it's kind of useless for the purposes of this series. The next one, and let me copy and paste this to be lazy. The next one we want to bring in is called JG Progress HUD. And this allows us to show a really nice looking spinner overlay, heads-up display, when any activity is going on. Apple has a built-in UI activity indicator view. This one's pretty popular. I'm a big fan of it. It's very customizable and flexible, so we're going to bring this in. The next thing we're going to bring in is Realm Swift. And Realm is a database similar to Core Data, where you can basically save things to the device, and we're doing this so when we open up the app when there's no internet, we can still have some cached data, and we can also use this to improve the performance of our app in general, reduce the number of times we need to read to Firebase to reduce our database costs. And the fourth one for this video that we'll bring in is called SD Web Image. So SD Web Image is a really popular and pretty old CocoaPod that is available for iOS. It allows you to do a lot of image loading capability. So traditionally, when you want to load a image from a URL, you would download it and you can show it in an image view, but there's no caching involved. So if you could cache it yourself and do all that management yourself, but SD Web Image can handle a lot of that and a lot of additional features for you. So we're going to bring this in for the sake of easeability of use. And yeah, I think that's what we'll limit it to for this part. So let's close up text edit and run a pod install. And let me expand this a little bit. Those are 4 pretty big frameworks, so it shouldn't take too long, but it should come in fairly quickly. So there they go, they're installing. Give it a few more seconds, and then rather while it's doing this, so the next thing we want to do is in our app, when the user starts to log in, we don't really do anything to show a spinner to indicate activity. So when the user hits the login button, we are going to show that JG progress heads-up display, the spinner, and we're also going to do the same thing for register. So it's pretty easy to do that. So once this decides to stop being slow, we'll do that. And then we're going to set up our table view for the conversation list, which will be behind this login screen. We'll also set up this view controller where the user can search for other users that they want to begin a chat with. And then depending on how we do on time, we'll set up our actual chat view controller where our bubbles will be shown, our chat bubbles. So it looks like it's on Realm Swift now. Realm is fairly large. I didn't anticipate it taking this long, but maybe I'm just impatient. So give it a few more minutes, or seconds hopefully. And while it's doing this, actually, let's just go to our conversation view controller and start talking about the things in here that we need. So basically a conversation list is nothing more than a table view. So all we're going to do is simply add a table view. And we're going to do this programmatically. So we are going to say private let table view is a UI table view. And in here we're going to say table is a UI table view. That's what we want. So we're going to return it here. We're also going to register a pretty basic cell. UI table. Man, it really doesn't want to autocomplete today, does it? Table.register. Huh, interesting. Maybe those CocoaPods finished and it's complaining now. Let's take a look. Okay, perfect. So these finished here. So let me start by closing terminal, and let me get rid of this actually and just build and run the project again since all these dependencies were brought in. So go ahead and hit run, and it's going to take a few more seconds than normal to build. And over here you might have build warnings. You can ignore the warnings. We shouldn't have any errors. And the other thing that I like to do is you can hit this little icon down here, and it filters out the warnings and will only show build errors that are blocking the actual successful compilation. So give it a few seconds. I feel like I say give it a few seconds every time, then it takes more than a few seconds, but let's bear with it. While it's doing that, what I'll do is I'll cd into the project, and we'll just commit the things we have brought in. So if we do a git status, you'll see we have all these CocoaPods we have brought in. We'll do a git add, a git commit, bring in pods, and we'll also do a git push. And it looks like this successfully compiled. Let me stop running so my computer's fan doesn't start being extra loud. This is almost done here, so just pushing to GitHub. And cool, let's go back to this. So we're gonna say private let table view is a UI table view, and parentheses there, let's table in here is a UI table view. We're going to return the table, but we also want to register to the table a couple cells. So we're going to start by doing just a basic UI table view cell here. So we'll say UI table view cell.self for an identifier of cell. We are also going to add it as a subview. So we're going to say table view. Let's create a function called setup table view. So I'm gonna create it here. We'll say private func setup table view, and here we're just gonna assign its delegate and data source for now. And we've added this here. Let's call setup table view in view.load. The other thing we want to do that I like to personally do is in here, let's set this table to be hidden by default. And the reason we want to do this is we first will fetch the conversations for the current logged in user. And if they don't have any conversations, we don't want to show the table just being empty. We want to show like a label in the middle of the screen saying no conversations with maybe like an image view. So if they do have conversations, we'll show the table view, otherwise leave it hidden. So let's also create a label, and we'll call it no conversations label, and it'll be a UI label. So label, we'll say label.text is no conversations, and we'll say label.text alignment is centered. We'll say label.text color is, let's go with gray. And we'll say label.font is system font, and we'll say 21 with a weight of medium. If it decides to autocomplete. Did I spell weight wrong? Weight of, we want system font size, that looks correct, and there's a weight in here, or there used to be. There it is. Yeah, the autocomplete sucks sometimes if it isn't apparent. So some of this for me is just kind of, I've been writing this code for almost a decade now, so I just know some of it. But sometimes if the autocomplete isn't cooperating, that doesn't mean that you're crazy and you don't know the thing you're typing. It just means that Xcode is not cooperating. So have a look at the docs. It always helps usually. And let's also set this to be hidden by default, because we don't want to show this while we're loading the conversations. Let's also add this as a subview. And we're going to want a function where we can go and fetch the conversation. So let's do fetch conversations. We're not going to implement this in this video, but let's just put it in here. This is complaining at us about the delegate and data source because we haven't made this controller conform yet. So go ahead and create an extension down here for the conversations view controller. And this will conform to UI table view delegate. That's not what we want. There it is, the delegate and the UI table view data source, like so. In here, we're going to need number of rows. Let's just return 1 for now. And we're going to need cell for row. So table view cell for row at index path. And we're going to dequeue a cell with an ID of cell. And if you recall, this is the string we used to register a basic cell up here. So that's what we're going to use down here. And we're also going to use the function that has a parameter for index path. We'll return the cell. We're going to say the text label dot text is hello world. So what we're actually going to do in practicality is have our own customized table view cell. Like I said, again, if we do good on time of getting through the things I want to get through in this video, we might add that here as well. So that's the table. So let's see, what else do we want to do? So in the fetch, we're going to basically fetch from Firebase, and based on that, we'll show either the table or the label here. The other thing we want in here is a spinner, and the spinner will actually show as we're fetching our conversations. So I'm going to use that JG progress thing that we brought in. So we go ahead and import that. And basically, we can create a spinner instance by saying private let spinner is a JG progress HUD, and I like to use the dark styled one. It just looks kind of nice, and I think that's all we'll do for the setup of the table view in here. Like I said, we're also going to be looking at the UI for the screen that shows the chat bubbles. So when a user taps on one of these cells, we want to push that chat screen onto the stack. So we need to implement did select table view did select row at index path. And the first thing we're going to do in here is just deselect that element, which is kind of a misleading name. This just unhighlights what you have selected. And I don't think we actually created a controller that will serve as our chat controller if memory serves. So we have our profile, we have our video, photo, new conversation. Yeah, so we don't have one. So go ahead and right click this controllers group and create a new file. And we're going to stick with a Cocoa Touch class. It'll be a UI view controller subclass. Call it chat view controller. And go ahead and create that and save it. Get rid of this commented code that's generated for us that nobody ever uses. And let's go back to this. So now in here, we can basically say let VC is chat view controller. Now we're eventually going to extend this to be instantiated and initialized with a user. But for now, this is sufficient. And we're going to say VC. Let's just give it a random title of Jenny Smith, the user that the person is having the conversation with. We're also going to say vc.navigation item, and there's a prefers large title display mode, and we're going to say never. And finally, we will push this view controller onto the stack with an animation. So before we move any further, let's run this, and let me just set a background color in the chat view controller for the sake of being able to see it. So go ahead and hit Command R. Oh, and actually the one thing that I wanted to do before we run, right now when you log in, we don't show any spinner or indicator. Let's quickly add that spinner, so I don't want to have to log in 5 times. So go to your login view controller, and at the very top here, go ahead and import JG progress HUD, create an instance of it, JG progress HUD, with a dark style. And we want to find the function that does the Firebase stuff, which is this function, login button tapped. So what I'll say here is spinner dot show in, and we're going to show in the current view. And basically, once we come back from this Firebase authentication attempt, we just want to get rid of the spinner. So before this guard, actually, we're going to say self.spinner.dismiss. And actually, you can do it down here and use strong self. And the other thing you want to do is whenever you do anything user interface related, you need to do it on the main thread. And I don't want to get into the weeds of threading too much, but this callback that Firebase gives us comes back on a background thread. So we need to call this function on the main queue. So we're going to say main.async and throw that in there. So that will essentially get rid of the spinner. And let's do the same really fast for the registration controller. So go ahead and copy this if you're lazy like me. Come to the top of the register view controller and go ahead and paste it in. We, of course, need to also import jg-progress-hud. And let's do a command F and search for Firebase in here. So here's that Firebase function, and it's in the register button tapped. So here we're going to say spinner.showInView, and this view is the view controller's own view. And now we can say strong self.spinner.dismiss, and again, let's wrap this in a dispatch on the main thread block. So dispatch queue.main.async, and throw that in there. And now let's go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. All right, we're gonna log in with Joe Smith, and let's see if I remember his password. So joe@gmail.com, and I think I made the password just password. So go ahead and hit enter, and you saw the spinner there, so much nicer UI, and we have logged into Joe's account. Now we don't see the table view here because if you recall, we set it to be hidden when we define it. So what we'll do is just say hidden is false in this fetch function. Since we're not implementing it, we'll say is hidden is false. And we should see a table view here now with just a hello world string. And the reason we don't is because it would be a fantastic idea if we set a frame to the table view after we added it as a subview. So let's override view did layout subviews. That's what we want. Call super on it, and we're going to make the frame of this the entirety of the screen. So view.bounds. Hopefully now we should see our table view. Let's hit Command R one more time. And we have our table view here. Now, obviously, like I said, we're going to want a custom cell where we have a circular avatar image for the user, their name, and then maybe the subtitle label is their most recent message. If it's an unread message, it should be bold. If it's not unread, or if it is read rather, it won't be bold, and all that stuff. But if we tap on this, you can see that we are now pushing this chat view controller, which is just red right now, but we're gonna take care of this in 5 seconds. The thing I don't want to forget to do is for this cell, for the conversation view controller, just set its accessory type to be a disclosure indicator. This is the little arrow you see on the right of the cell, like over here. But before we run it again, let's do some more implementation. So let's go to the chat view controller and set some basic stuff up in here. And personally, this is the most exciting part of the setup because this is kind of like the meat where everything happens, like the actual chatting. So go ahead and import message kit. Change the subclass of this to a chat view controller. I believe it's is it a message view controller? That's what we want, a message view controller. And we can leave this as red, but what we want to do now is define 2 structs, and one of the structs will represent a message, and the other one will represent a sender. So let's literally just call them that. So a message is going to be a message type. And this message type comes in from the MessageKit framework. And you'll see an error pop up here that we don't conform. Hit that and hit fix. And it'll bring in the properties that we need. And these are defined by that MessageKit framework. So there is a sender for each message. There is an identifier that's used to deduplicate. There is a sent date time, of course, and then there's a kind. So if we command click into this, you'll see the kinds that are supported are text-based. So we're going to be doing this. We may look at attributed as well. We'll be doing a video on photo messages, video messages, location messages, just emojis, voice messages. I didn't plan on doing contacts, but we'll see how we do in terms of number of videos. And if you guys care, I guess, we might do contacts as well. So let's go back here. And the other model that we want to create is for a sender. So we're going to say this is a sender type. And again, the sender type is a protocol that comes in from the MessageKit. You'll get an error here, hit that, hit fix, and it'll auto stub out the properties it needs. So in this case, we just have a sender ID and a display name. So what we will actually also do is extend this to have a photo. So we're going to say var photo URL, and this will be a URL. And let's actually make this a string just for the sake of ease in this video. And what else do we want? So we have their name, their ID, their image. I think that should be sufficient for this part. So this controller gives us a message collection view, and there are 3 protocols on it that we need to assign. The first one is a data source, so that should be a message data source actually, like so. Assign that to self, and there's 2 more. So the next one I believe is a layout delegate, and it's a message layout delegate. And the third one is a message display delegate, if I'm not mistaken. So it'll complain that we don't conform to these. So we're going to create an extension down here on this chat view controller, and we're going to conform to all of these. So the first one is a message data source. Next one is a message layout delegate. Third one is a message display delegate. And you'll see these errors go away, and there will be an error here because there are some minimum required functions. So hit that and fix, and it will stub it out for you. And the first function here basically wants to know who the current sender is. And the reason we have this function is this is how the framework decides to show the chat bubble on the right as if you sent it, or on the left as if you received it. So let's go ahead and before we fill these out, up here for this controller, let's create a private var called messages. And this is going to be an array of messages. Let's just assign it. And just to demo in this video, let's append some messages. So we'll say messages, and we're going to append a message if it decides to autocomplete. So a message is the struct that we created up here, if you recall. So go ahead and hit enter for autocomplete, and let me line break this so we can see all of it. And before we even actually fill this out, let's create a sender up here. We're going to say mock, we'll just say self rather. Well, we can't use self, so we'll say self sender is a sender. And we have a photo URL, a sender ID, and a display name. So what we're going to say for the URL, we'll just keep it empty. We'll say 1. And for the display name, let's just say Joe Smith. Now, obviously, this will come in from Firebase. The ID, in our case, we will use the sender's email address plus some random ID that we're going to generate and put into Firebase. And the photo URL, once we upload the profile picture, we'll grab that URL. So this is the sender. The message ID, I believe, is a string. Yeah, so this is a string. So I'll just say 1. And the date will just make the current date. And the kind is a enum with associated values. So we're going to show a text message for now. We'll just call it hello world message. And let me copy and paste this once. And just copy and paste this to make it a bit longer, just so you guys can see different sized bubbles. And let's see, why is this complaining? Text, we have text in here, and the error went away. Now what we can do is in this function, we can return the current user is self-sender. The message for item, before we do that, let's do this. Number of messages will be return messages.count. And for this, we want to return messages, and in here, the item at indexPath.section. So you might be wondering why we're using section, because in a table view, traditionally you would use the row, and this messages array is simply a collection of messages. So why on earth are we using section? The reason is the message kit framework uses sections to separate every single message. And the reasoning is, why they do it internally is because a message on screen can have multiple pieces. It might have a date time that it shows under the message. It might have some other data, and it's just cleaner to implement it as a single section per message. So go ahead, and I believe you can hit Command R. We shouldn't have any build errors. But now when we tap into a conversation over here, we should see some messages. So if you tap in, we see that we have a really nice looking bubble here, these 2 bubbles. We're going to fill out the avatars later. We also have down here a input to type in new messages. We also have this accessory button here if we want to attach photos and voice messages and all that jazz, which we'll do later on in upcoming parts. But this is the bare bones skeleton of how this entire screen is going to look. So that is this. And let's see, what else do we want to do in this video? Let's also add a button up here to allow the user to create a new conversation. So this screen is the conversation view controller. So let's go back here. And in view.load, we are going to assign the navigation. I guess we can just do the navigation item directly, .right bar button item. And this is going to be a UI bar button item. And we're going to initialize it with should be a system bar, there it is, bar button system item. And the type that we want, I believe, is compose. The target is self. And the action, we're going to create a function called did tap compose button. And let's go create this function. So I really shouldn't put the functions just anywhere in this file. I guess we can organize it later. But for the sake of time, let's just throw it right below it. So we're going to create this function here. And in this function, we want to present the new conversation view controller that we created before. It is empty right now. Let's get rid of this commented out code. Go back to this conversation controller, and let's simply present it in a nav controller. So we're going to say let nav vc is a UI navigation controller with a root view controller. And we're going to say vc is the new conversation view controller, and we can simply put that as the root here. And let's go ahead and present this nav vc animated true. Command R to build and run. And when we tap on this button now, we see we get the controller presented. There's no background color, so it looks a little strange. So let's go and put a background color there in this new conversation, and also add a search bar up here. And of course, when you get this screen, you should be able to search for users. So head on over to the new conversation view controller. And in here, let's start by saying view.background color is white. And we're going to want a search bar in here. So create a private variable called search bar, and it'll be a search bar. We also want this controller to conform to the UI search bar delegates. And the function that we're just going to stub out in here for now is search button clicked. And it's such a pet peeve of mine. This is clicked and not tapped. But anyways, this gets called when the user taps the search button on the keyboard. Let's also set some properties up for this search bar. So let me actually create this way. And we can return this. And what we want to set on here is the placeholder text. And we're going to call it search for users, like that. And we're going to set its delegate here. Now, instead of setting it as a subview or adding it as a subview, we're going to want to say navigation controller dot navigation bar dot top item dot top item dot title view equals the search bar. And what this will do is this will put the bar, as it kind of implies, into the navigation bar. So you don't need to manually try to frame it and assign its position. We're also going to add a cancel button to this view controller so the person can actually dismiss it. So we'll say the navigation item dot right bar button is a UI bar button item. And this time we'll instantiate this with a title. Title will be cancel, style will be done, target will be self, and action, we're going to create a function called dismiss self. Go ahead and copy that. And this will simply call the dismiss view controller animated true completion nil. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds of this controller. We'll probably dedicate our own part to this to just understand in depth how searching works. But when we actually do finally search and get results back, we are going to want to show those results in a table view. So let's create a private table view. And simply create it like we did elsewhere as follows. We're going to want to register a cell to this. Whoops. It'll be a UI table view cell.self with an ID of cell. And again, let's say is hidden by default, like so. Let's also import that progress HUD. I haven't decided yet if we're going to do real-time search or if we're going to make the user have to click search to begin the search. But let's just bring that in for the time being and create a spinner instance. You guys could probably tell that a lot of this I'm doing on the fly. I don't really like planning out these things super in advance. I think it's more practical and helpful for all of you to see the real kind of deal of how to think about and plan through all of these apps and kind of videos. So there's our table. It's hidden. And we're also going to create a label that shows if there's no users found for what the person is searching. So this is going to be no results label. It'll be a UI label. Let's put parens there. Label, return that label. Label.text will be no results. And did I spell that right? Results, yeah, I spelled that right. Let's also make the text alignments be centered on this. Change the text color to be a gray, and change the font to be system font of 21. And I don't know why I do 21, I just like that size, I guess. And I guess this will be medium. So we've got our table where the results will be shown. We've got a label that we can show if we don't have results. And let's make this guy hidden as well by default, like so. And what more do we want to add? So let's actually hit Command R. So we wrote quite a bit of code in here. So let's just hit Command R and see if it runs. And we broke it already. So let's go fix this. So let's spell self correctly. That would be a problem. So now hit Command R and we still have a problem. Great. So this action is at selector self. I think we have this down here though, don't we? Yeah, we do. We want this to be prefixed at Objective-C so it can be available to the selector. So go ahead and hit Command R again. And now, when we hit Compose, we've got this much nicer looking screen. It's not transparent. We can actually see it. And we've got a bar up here, and we can start typing in here. And of course, nothing really happens. We can clear it out. We can dismiss the controller. But this is essentially the skeleton of the rest of our app. And I also planned on doing the profile really fast in this video, but maybe I'll wrap it up here because I don't wanna sit here and get too much into it. Otherwise, we're gonna build the whole app in this part. So before we actually do wrap up, when the user presses the new conversation compose button and this screen is presented, we do want to pop the keyboard up for them by default into the search bar. And the reasoning is if you want to compose a message, it's kind of obvious that you're going to want to type, and there's no reason to have the user need to tap on the bar themselves again. It's kind of redundant. So you want to say search bar become first responder, which will invoke the keyboard on the search bar as soon as view.load is called, which is called as soon as the view loads. So as you pop it up, the keyboard's already here, and you can start typing. Hit that, and nothing actually happens, and we don't even dismiss the keyboard, but again, separate video. So that's where I'm going to wrap this up. I will commit and push this right after. So just to quickly recap, we brought in some dependencies, we set up our basic table view here, we set up the foundation of how this screen is going to look, and we set up the model for it, the two models. We brought in realms, so when we add a caching layer, we'll be super performant and save some money for our real-time database. No need to spend more than we actually need to. And we set up the search screen where the user is going to go and search for users to begin a new conversation. So that was part 8. If you made it through 8 parts of me talking, congrats. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't hit that like button already, make sure to do so. Helps out the videos quite a bit with the YouTube algorithm. I really appreciate it. Helps me make more videos for all of you. If you're new to the channel and have not subscribed, make sure to do so. I've noticed that over 80% of you are not subscribed but consistently watch the videos. So please do subscribe. It helps just grow everything, and it motivates me to make more things if I know people are watching and enjoying it. Comment down below if you have any errors, any installation errors of CocoaPod, suggestions, questions. I reply to every single comment. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in part 9.